All right, it has been just one day since the Supreme Court voted in a 5-4 decision to uphold Obamacare's individual mandate as a tax, and already Americans all across the country are rallying together in preparation for November. Now, meanwhile, members of Congress are ramping up their efforts to repeal the legislation on Capitol Hill, and that's not surprising considering that many detrimental consequences that this law will have on families all over this country if it is not overturned on day one of a Romney administration. So, with that said, it's clear that it is more important than ever for the American people to elect members of Congress this November who will vote to repeal this law. Joining me now with more on that and the threat that Obamacare poses and the ongoing efforts to repeal it, Wyoming Senator John Barrasso and Utah Senator Mike Lee. Welcome both of you back to the program.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so Senator Lee, the House has scheduled a vote. That's going to be July the 11th. Now, I know things are different in the Senate, but interestingly, there's about 14 prominent Democrats. Joe Manchin is one of them. Claire McCaskill is another one. John Tester is another one. So do you think you guys can push, perhaps, to at least put these guys on the record? Is there any mechanism that you can use in the Senate to at least highlight the fact that they don't want to vote on this?
We can certainly push, Sean, and I think we should. I think the American people deserve to have a vote in both houses of Congress, especially given that we've got a major provision, an unpopular one at that, of the Affordable Care Act that's just been deemed a tax by the Supreme Court of the United States. We deserve to have some input, at least, in Congress before that tax takes effect. And so I think the sooner that vote can happen, the better. That doesn't mean we'll get the vote, but we sure are going to try.
Yeah, and I would say, Senator Barrasso, that in fact, this is the last thing that Claire McCaskill and John Tester and Joe Manchin want. Am I wrong on that?
You're absolutely right, Sean. They don't want to vote on this at all, and I think Harry Reid will do everything in his power as the majority leader of the Democrats to try to block a vote in the Senate. You know, the Supreme Court may have ruled this as not unconstitutional, but this health care law is still very unpopular. It is unaffordable, and as a doctor, I will tell you, it is unworkable.
All right, and Senator Lee, because they used the reconciliation process to pass this, is important. Because the Supreme Court ruled this as a tax, that's important. Because at that point, you only need 51 votes, correct?
Correct. We could get this done with 51 votes. At a minimum, we could get a repeal of the Affordable Care Act's provisions dealing with the individual mandate, since they've been deemed a tax. So we know we could get that done with 51 votes. There are other provisions within the Affordable Care Act that we could also accomplish through the same mechanism. So whether that happens this year or in the next Congress after the Republicans take the majority in the Senate remains to be seen. But we can get this done with 51 votes.
And Senator Barrasso, the likelihood of the Democrats obstructing is what percent?
Well, I think it's a very high percentage, but plus, even if you got the reconciliation, the 51 votes now in the Senate, Sean, it still goes to President Obama, who I would imagine would veto it. So we need a Republican in the White House, which is why we're all working so hard to get Mitt Romney elected in November. This is now all up to the voters in November. That is going to be the final chance to stop and reverse this health care law.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I think it's really important, too, for the American people to get these guys on record in an election year. Now that this has been ruled a tax, and it was not sold as a tax, isn't it important now that this be put on record? Like, for example, I don't think Claire McCaskill would have the courage to stand up against the Obama administration. She won't go to the convention, but if push comes to shove, so is it, what power do you have within the Senate rules, if any, to push this to at least make a point that the Democrats are refusing to allow a vote on this?
Yeah, there are a number of different procedural moves that we will make in an effort to try to force a vote on this in the Senate, on repeal, also on the specific components of this, listing it as a tax and saying, okay, how many of you will vote for it now? We'll try to bring this either as a direct vote or as an amendment on other bills.
Yeah, and Senator Mike Lee, I know it's not often that there is a filibuster of any kind, right? So is that a potential, a real old-fashioned, you know, keep talking filibuster?
Well, one way or another, Sean, the filibuster rule doesn't apply with respect to the reconciliation. because the whole point of budget reconciliation is to limit debate. And the idea of a filibuster is to prolong debate, even though it often is perceived as having a very different effect. So at the end of the day, that's the beauty of the reconciliation process here, is that it allows us to get some of these things done with only 51 votes.
All right, so
that's all the more reason why we need to get this message out there that this election matters. We've got to elect Mitt Romney. We've got to elect Republicans to the United States Senate this fall.
And conservatives that are on record saying that they will vote to repeal the largest tax increase in history. And by the way, it's the double whammy, as I've been saying all night, because then you got the Bush tax cuts expiring, and I doubt the Democrats will vote on that prior to an election, will they?
No, and Sean, remember, Sean, that I mean, with all of these things, the Senate hasn't passed a budget in over 3 years now. Yeah. You know, that's why we have the No Budget, No Pay Act out there. Harry Reid has not brought a budget that a Democrat has voted for at all, whether it be the president's budget or Republican budgets. The Democrats have blocked and opposed voting for any budget. So we need to actually get a budget passed using reconciliation as a way to change the Obama health care law.
Does that give you an opening to deal with this?
It doesn't. Well, that's why we've been working to try to get any budget passed, but Harry Reid has effectively blocked that as well.
Unbelievable. Huge campaign issue, gentlemen, especially with $5 trillion in debt that's been accumulated in that time. Thank you both, senators, for being with us. Appreciate it.